mission to provide national and global leadership in the practice of organ transplantation. An affiliated society of the Transplantation Society, ISOT holds a responsibility to establish guidelines of clinical practice, advance programs of education, and to promote ethical standards for clinical care and scientific investigation. Let's begin the opening ceremony of ISOT 2021. Let's begin the opening ceremony of ISOT 2021. May I welcome the following dignitaries. President of Indian Society of Organ Transplantation, Dr. Jayaprakash Oja. Secretary, ISOT, Dr. Vivek Balakrishna Kute. Treasurer, ISOT, Dr. Narayan Prasad. Organizing Chairman, ISOT 2021, Dr. A.B. Abraham M. Organizing Secretary, ISOT 2021, Dr. Rajesh R. Nair. Treasurer, ISOT 2021, Dr. Maman M. John. The past President, ISOT, Dr. Sandeep Guleria. And President-elect, Dr.
Recording
Suresh
in
Roy.
progress. Recording stopped.
May I now request the President of ISOT to welcome the dignitaries and delegates.
Thank you. Can you hear me? My voice is clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it is very pleasant talks to perform. Professor Arvind Rath, Nobel Laureate in Economics and Chief Guest of today's function. Dr. Marcelo, Guest of Honor. Dr. Sandeep Guleria, Past President of Society. Dr. Sunil Sraf, President-elect, Chairman, Organizing Committee. Dr. Abi Abraham, Organizing Secretary, Dr. Rajesh Nair, and other dignitaries on the dais. I extend my warm welcome to one and each of you at the occasion of opening ceremony of the 31st Annual Conference of Indian Society of Organ Transplantation. The society was founded at Ahmedabad and established in 1990. The objective of society is to promote organ transplant activity in India as well as to maintain the high standard of education and research related to organ transplantation. I deeply appreciate the hard work and effort of Organizing Committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Abraham and Dr. Nair to make this conference possible during the very difficult time, particularly COVID-19 pandemic. I understand situation in Kerala is not so good in relation to COVID-19. I express my gratitude and thanks to guest of honor, to chief guest, to accept our invitation and grace this occasion. I wish the conference a grand success. Now I hand over the mic to Professor Kute to start the proceeding of the opening ceremony. Professor Kute, please. Professor Kute?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, President Dr. Jayaprakash sir, for the kind introduction and welcome note on 31st Annual Congress of Indian Society of Organ Transplantation. It is my pleasure to be here as a Secretary ISOT in the opening ceremony. I welcome all the delegates, all the chairpersons, all the speakers, all the faculty from India and international who are here in the opening ceremony of the ISOT. I welcome Chairman of Organizing Committee, Dr. Abhi Abram, Dr. Rajesh Nair, Organizing Secretary, ISOT 2021. I welcome our chief guest, Professor Alvin Roth, who has joined us from San Francisco this morning. I welcome our guest of honor, Professor Marcelo Cantonvich, President, the Transplantation Society, and Chairman, TTS India Relation Committee. I also welcome our past President, Dr. Sandeep Guleria, President-elect, Dr. Sunil Shroff, ISOT Treasurer, Dr. Narayan Prasad, Treasurer of Organizing Committee, Dr. Meman John. With this, I will start the Secretary report. Dr. Jayaprakash, screen is visible.
It is visible, Vivek. Please go ahead.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to give the Secretary report in the opening ceremony of 31st Annual Congress of Indian Society of Organ Transplantation. ISOT has more than 1,500 members who are working in the kidney, liver, heart, lung transplant. The ISOT is working under leadership of Dr. Jayaprakash, President of the Society, Dr. Sunil Shroff, President-elect, Dr. Sandeep Guleria, past President, Vice President Dr. Prem Prakash Verma, Dr. Ashish Sharma, Dr. Shruti Dave, myself as a Secretary, and Dr. Manish Rathi, Joint Secretary. Dr. Narayan Prasad is Treasurer, and we have experts working as an Executive Council, Dr. Pankaj Shah, Dr. S.K. Agarwal, Dr. Santesh Varghese, Dr. Dhananjay Agarwal, Dr. A.K. Bhalla, Dr. Dharmendra, Dr. Harshvardhan, Dr. Manish Balwani, and Dr. Manisha Sahai, who is working as Editor-in-Chief of our journal, Indian Journal of Transplantation. We are lucky to have our chief guest, Professor Alvin Roth, for joining this opening ceremony, along with Professor Marcelo Cantonvich as a guest of honor. Because of COVID-19 pandemic, they have joined us from San Francisco and Canada. Welcome you, sir. The Scientific Committee of ISOT has recommended following orations this year. Dr. Vidya Acharya oration to Georgie Abraham, Dr. H.L. Trivedi oration to Stephen G. Tullius, Dr. R.V.S. Yadav oration to Ashish Sharma, Dr. K.N. Udupa Memorial Lecture, which is given to young transplanter Hari Shankar Meshram. The Credential Committee of ISOT, chaired by Dr. Sandeep Guleria, past President of the ISOT, awarded Fellowship of Indian Society of Organ Transplantation to these experts from all over the India. Dr. Jayaprakash from Varanasi, Dr. Mukut means PGI Chandigarh, Dr. Natarajan Gopal Krishnan, Chennai, Dr. Nisit Mohanty, Bhubaneswar, Dr. Pradeep Salgia, Indore, Dr. Ashok Kumar Sharma from Jaipur. The society appreciates their immense contribution in the field of transplantation in increasing access to living and deceased donor organ transplantation. Coming to the transplant data of India, between 2013 to 2019, around 62,000 transplants are performed in India, 85% living donor, 15% from deceased donation. Kidney and liver are major organs that are transplanted. However, heart, lung, pancreas, small bowel transplant numbers are increasing over the last 5 years. The deceased donor transplant is well established in West and South India, shown in dark green color. The deceased donation is recently initiated in Odisha, West Bengal, and it is yet to be initiated in Guwahati, Assam, and Seven Sisters of India. The ISOT would work more in expanding deceased donor transplant program in coming years. These are number of transplants performed in India in 2019 and in 2020. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, the transplant numbers has come down in 2020 because COVID is a health priority over organ transplant, but we proceeded with transplantation as per safety measures issued by Government of India. We can see the transplant number has come down to 50 to 60% for different organs due to COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully, the transplant number would increase further in 2021 as the COVID burden is coming down in India. During COVID pandemic, all the members of ISOT contributed to multi-center research study on different aspects like outcome of transplant recipients with COVID-19, outcome of transplant from living donor who recovered from COVID-19, or transplant in patients who recovered from COVID-19. Also, we have mucormycosis epidemic during second wave in India, and this is a multi-center cohort study on mucormycosis in kidney transplant recipients. The members of the ISOT, along with members of Liver Transplant Society, Heart and Lung Transplant Society, contributed to NATO transplant specific guidelines with reference to COVID-19. These guidelines are helpful to improve the transplant outcome as per the checklist provided by the guideline. The members of the ISOT, transplant professionals from other transplant society, contributed to NATO COVID-19 vaccine guideline for transplant recipient. This was published in April 21. It suggests that transplant recipient should be given COVID vaccination and they should follow COVID appropriate behavior despite complete schedule of COVID-19, because the outcome, the safety profile is in transplant recipient is less because of their immunocompromised status. Recently, experts also published this guideline on COVID vaccine. It recommends that transplant recipient should complete the COVID vaccination before transplant. If it is not possible, at least one dose should be given, and when second dose is due after transplant, it should be given 4 to 12 weeks after transplant. There was ISOT election in the last 2 months. We are overjoyed with the enthusiastic participation from all members of the ISOT in ISOT elections, and this is the new executive council which will start working from this year for 2 more years. President-elect is Dr. Georgie Abraham, Vice President Dr. Sanjay Kulte, Dr. Deepak Ray, Dr. Pallav Gupta. Myself is re-elected as a secretary. Joint secretary is Manish Balwani, treasurer Pankaj Shah, and this will be joined by executive council members Dr. S.K. Agarwal, Sanjeev Gulati, Subho Banerjee, Shyam Bansal, Arpita Ray Chaudhary, Divya Bajpai, Jigar Srimali, and Girish MS. The newly elected executive members will take their turn from general body meeting which will be held on 9th October evening. We will also host transplant games in December, and hopefully we would be able to meet in person in 32nd annual congress of ISOT next year in Nagpur. With this, I will conclude my talk, and I thank all the members of ISOT. I thank all the delegates who are joining this opening ceremony. With this, I will request Dr. Abi Abraham, Chairman of Organizing Committee ISOT 2021, to express his few words. Over to Dr. Abi Abraham.
Thank you, Dr. Vivek. As the organizing chairman, it is with great pleasure I welcome you all to this annual conference of the Indian Society of Organ Transplantation, a meeting jointly organized by the transplant professionals of Kochi that is being held at Lulu Grand Hyatt as a hybrid meeting. All of us know that the global pandemic of COVID-19 had a major impact on the practice of medicine, particularly the solid organ transplantation. Pandemic also brought about the vulnerabilities of our transplant recipients in terms of their increased susceptibility to infection because of their medical comorbidities, and also brought about other challenges like screening for COVID and modifying immunosuppression at the time of transplantation. Fortunately, a lot of strides have been made in the recent months in the management of COVID as well as mass vaccination. Pandemic also changed the way in which conferences are conducted. We have become digital. In fact, this conference was actually scheduled to be done last year in a physical format, which we had to postpone to this year, and we are doing mostly in a virtual fashion. To enhance the participation, actually we reduced the registration fee to rupees 2,000 so that we will have maximum number of registrations. And all the registered delegates will have complete access to the recorded program for the next 1 year. And we have renowned transplant professionals across the world will be as faculty. And there will be parallel sessions for kidney, transplant urology, liver and pancreas, heart, transplant pathology, as well as for transplant coordinators. So I request you all to attend the next 3 days meetings in a regular way. Looking forward to a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abi Abraham. Now I request Dr. Rajesh Nair, Secretary, Organizing Committee, ISOT 21 Kochi, to say a few words.
Thanks, Dr. Vivek. Respected Chief Guest, Dr. Alvin Roth, Dr. Marcelo, distinguished members of the ISOT Council, friends and colleagues. It's a matter of, at the outset, let me thank the ISOT Council for giving Kochi an opportunity to host the ISOT annual conference. As Dr. Abi said, it was planned as a physical meeting in last year in October 2020, but COVID had a huge impact on almost all walks of life, and we had to postpone. Hopefully, we were hoping that we'll be able to do physical at least in 2021. Unfortunately, we are unable to do that. So this is being done on a hybrid fashion. Regarding the transplant activities in Kochi, Kochi is very active so far as transplant programs are concerned, both living and deceased. as Dr. Kute rightly pointed out, South India has done fairly well so far as diseased organ donation program is concerned. And we have in Kerala diseased organ program called Kerala Network of Organ Sharing, which is done fairly well. We had certain hiccups earlier, and now it is back in a revival mode. Regarding multi-organ transplants, Kochi is very active so far as multi-organ transplant is concerned, including liver, pancreas, simultaneous pancreas, kidney, composite tissue, hand transplant. Kochi is the pioneer in India. So we are very active so far as transplant program and transplant activities are concerned. We have a very informative, very good scientific feast coming up. The ISOT, the society has put a lot of effort to make a very good program, including renowned international experts across the globe. So it's a very good opportunity for all of us to update our scientific knowledge and interact with them, interact with the experts. Coming to the other side of Cochin, Kerala is known as God's own country, and Cochin is known as Queen of Arabian Sea. Unfortunately, we are unable to host you all physically. You would have all enjoyed that. But hopefully, we'll be able to meet again in future in Cochin to savor the beaches, the backwaters, and the hill stations. Once again, welcoming you all to a very good scientific feast. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh Nair. Now, I will introduce our chief guest, Professor Alvind Roth. Professor Alvind Roth needs no introduction to those of us in the field of transplantation. His groundbreaking work in area of game theory, experimental economics, and market design as it relates to kidney exchanges has served as a fundamental for tens of thousands of living donor kidney transplant around the world. This work was a part of reason he shared 2012 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics. Professor Alvind Roth has demonstrated a special interest in helping to expand kidney exchange in India, having traveled to both Ahmedabad and Delhi to share his wisdom with us. I am sure he would be here again today, but for the challenge that COVID has beset upon us. Instead, we are fortunate now to have him join us all from California as a chief guest for the opening ceremony. I request Professor Alvind Roth to address the opening ceremony.
Thank you, Dr. Kute, and thank you all for inviting me. Kidney disease is a global problem, and it needs global solutions. And it's not just something that's going to be solved one country at a time. We're all going to have to work together on this. So it's important that a giant country like India should lead the way in figuring out how to deal with kidney disease in the developing world. And I'll get a chance to talk to you in a little while about the impressive advances that have been made in India. And sitting here in California, I'm very honored to join you in talking about these things and in watching you move them forward. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Alvind Roth, for your valuable time to join this opening ceremony, followed by there will be opening plenary session. Now I welcome our guest of honor, Professor Marcelo Cantonovich. Sir is President of the Transplantation Society and Chairman of TTS India Relation Committee. Professor Marcelo Cantonovich has also visited Ahmedabad and Delhi, and he is contributing his best to expand kidney transplantation in India, especially the deceased donation. Now I request Professor Marcelo Cantonovich to give his address in the opening ceremony. Can you unmute, sir? Sir, yeah, please.
And namaste. It's great to connect with you. It would be much better to do it in person. I prepare a plenary, a few minute presentation. Do you have it?
Yes, sir.
So I would like to, at least live, thank all of you for attending this conference, the organizing committee, and my dear friends from India. I can see Jai Prakash, Vivek Kute online, and others that I cannot see, Professor Sandeep Gulera, and many others. So I would suggest, and Professor Roth, it's a real honor to be here with you, at least virtually. I would recommend that you play the short video that I prepared.
Yes, sir. Dr. Rajesh, can you start
so much.
Recorded session of Professor Alvin Roth? Of Marcelo Cantonovich?
I would like to thank Professor Vivek Kute and the organizing committee of the Indian Society of Transplantation for the opportunity of presenting today. I would like to welcome you all to the 31st annual conference of the Indian Society of Organ Transplantation that will take place in Kochi. And I'm sorry I cannot be there with you. I hope that next year I will be able to be present at congresses organized in India. When was this picture taken? You can see Sandeep Gulera, Professor Haberal, Vivek Kute, and other people from the TTS. And here you can see Vasanthi Ramesh. So this picture was taken in 2019 when we were all having in-person meetings and congresses. What's the vision and the mission of the TTS, an NGO in association with the WHO? The TTS will provide the focus for global leadership in transplantation, the development of the science and clinical practice, continuing education, scientific communication, and guidance on ethical practice. This is data from the Global Observatory on Donation and Transplantation and the ONT for 2019. And as you can see, less than 10% of the global needs were fulfilled. This is the global transplantation activity for 2019. Dark red depicts increased activity, purple a bit less, then light blue, decreased activity, and gray depicts no activity or no reporting. This is data from Spain. And as you can see, the rate of deceased donors in 2019, before the pandemic, was 49.6 per million inhabitants. Deceased donor transplantation, 66.5, and similar data for liver transplantation, and living donor kidney transplantation, 7.2 per million population, with 16 per million of donors after declaration of circulatory death. This is data for India in 2019. The actual deceased donor rate was 0.5 per million population, and there are more living donors than deceased donors for kidney transplantation, but still at a low rate per million population, 6.29 for living donor kidneys and 0.83 for deceased donor kidneys, no DCDs. And for liver transplantation, total liver 1.89 per million population, 1.45 for living, and 0.44 for deceased donors, and lower figures for heart, lung, pancreas, and small bowel. I'd like to thank Professor Kute for providing me this slide where you can see the living donor kidney and deceased donor kidney transplant activity from 2013 to 2018, with more living donors than deceased donors that remain stagnant. Similar picture for liver transplantation, living and deceased donors. And very small numbers for heart, lung, and pancreas transplantation. This is an updated slide from Dr. Vasenti Ramesh looking at deceased donor transplantation for kidney, liver, and other organs for 2019 and 2020. Obviously, 2020 in red, the activity decreased significantly because of the pandemic. And on the right, you can see the living donor numbers. When looking at the global transplantation activity for 2019 and the activity reported, it is clear that there is a need to increase access to organ transplantation in India. What is the role of the TTS? Education of transplant healthcare professionals, standardized practice, advice organizations and governments, and dissemination of the information. We recently participated at a Pontifical Academy of Sciences and WHO workshop under the leadership of Drs. Delmonico, Dominguez Gill, and Nancy Asher. And what are the next steps? We request governments, national agencies, and ministries of health to address the burden of diseases resulting in organ failure requiring organ transplantation, the need to prioritize organ transplantation as a treatment option for patients with organ failure by considering technical aspects to develop and optimize organ transplantation, strengthening the regulatory capacity for oversight of practice, standardized criteria to list patients for organ transplantation from deceased donors. And you can see references from the Canadian Society of Transplantation for kidney, liver, and heart transplantation, to select donors and recipients for living donor transplantation, to promote educational events about standardized listing criteria for organ transplantation, to implement such standards with the help of regional TTS champions, to urge member states' stakeholders responsible for organ donation and transplantation policy to assess criteria for the allocation of organs from deceased donors, to enable patients with organ failure to have access to organ transplantation from deceased donors standardized by medical criteria, to promote standards of practices to optimize organ transplantation as a treatment option for patients with organ failure, increase access to organ transplantation from deceased donors based on medical criteria, not advantaged by gender, ethnicity, or social status. We're also planning on developing report cards using data available through the ONT and GODT. And there will be a proposal from the ONT to the WHO in preparation for the 2022 World Health Assembly, and the support of India will be very important. This is a slide that was created by my wife, Andy, looking at the relationship between meetings and level of enthusiasm and engagement. And as you can see, when we are at a meeting, the level of enthusiasm is very high, but then we go back home. And the time goes on, we are on call, we have clinics, some of us are in the OR, and then the level of enthusiasm and engagement declines. We need to close this gap. We need to keep an increased level of enthusiasm and engagement. We need to increase the number of meetings, and we need to follow up on the decisions that we make, with the goal to increase access to ethical transplantation worldwide. I would like to invite you all to the TTS 2022 Congress that will take place in Buenos Aires, Argentina in September of next year, hopefully in person. See you in Buenos Aires. And I would like to end with this beautiful picture that was sent to me by Vasenti Ramesh. I would like to thank you all for your attendance and hope to see you in person in India and in Buenos Aires, Argentina next year.
Professor Marcelo, will you like to add something?
I can't hear you well. Sorry. Can you say that again?
Would you like to add something?
No, I would just like to thank you. And I'm happy to answer questions if there is any.
Thank you, sir. With moving on, now I request Dr. Sandeep Guleria, past president of ISOT, to say his words in opening ceremony.
Professor Kantovich, Dr. Alvin Roth, Professor Jayaprakash, Vivek Kute, and of course all the new members of the Indian Society of Organ Transplantation. It's been a rare privilege for me to be associated with this society for the last 30 years, and I feel a sense of immense satisfaction at the tremendous amount of progress that the Indian Society of Organ Transplantation has achieved. We continue to follow the principles that we agree by and that we agree with the TTS on following ethical, live-related renal transplantation and liver transplantation. We remain open to criticism and happy to answer any critics and to make sure that the law is enforced in word as well as in acts. However, we do know that these things will continue happening. We will continue seeing organ rackets everywhere in the world, but we have to remain vigilant and make sure that we are able to do a course correction. In the developing world, we have problems that are unique. We have patients, far more patients who need a transplant and far few donors available. We also have great economic disparity. And all this does lead to a little bit of commerce, which we are trying hard to curtail and control. I think it's important to remember that ever since we have made this activity illegal, the number of transplants, of illegal transplants since 1994 is now less than 1%. However, we have to remain vigilant, and the Indian Society of Organ Transplantation remains dedicated to this cause. I would like to thank Vivek and offer my heartiest congratulations to all the incoming members and congratulate Vivek on organizing an absolutely wonderful hybrid meeting. I think my congratulations should also go to the Kochi team for doing a great job. This is the first ISOT that is being held in a virtual mode, and I can only wish them all the very best. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, Professor Sandeep Guleria. Now I request President-elect Professor Sunil Shroff, sir, for his talk in opening ceremony.
Thank
Professor
you.
Sunil Shroff.
Thank you, Vivek, and good evening to everyone, and good morning to my friends in the West. On the behalf of the currently elected Executive Committee of ISOT 2021, I, at the outset, would like to congratulate Dr. A.B. Abraham, Dr. Rajesh Nair, and Dr. Maman for organizing this meeting in these very difficult times. I and Georgie Abraham are the only two, perhaps, from outside Kerala. I must say that we thoroughly got bored with all the virtual meeting and decided to take a plunge, ignore the COVID devil, and come to God's own country to enjoy this beautiful place and the conference. In the recent time, in the last week, we had a unprecedented election where 54 ISOT members contested for 18 posts. We had 700 ballots. It took us almost 9 hours to count the ballots. What it shows is there's unprecedented kind of interest in the activity of the society. And I think together we can create a very strong and vibrant Indian Society of Organ Transplantation. Before I leave you, I would also want to pay my respect, and I would request you all to say a small prayer. Close your eyes and say a small prayer to all the COVID warriors, and some of them our own colleagues, who passed away. COVID is not over yet. We need to continue to take our precautions and move forward, because life doesn't stop. So my request is, say a silent prayer to some of our very dear colleagues we lost. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Sunil Shroff. We would work together to take ISOT to a greater height to increase access to transplantation in India, especially deceased donor organ transplantation. Now, I request ISOT Treasurer Dr. Narayan Prasad, who is also Secretary of Indian Society of Nephrology, to say his thoughts in the opening ceremony.
Dr. Narayan Prasad is not connected apparently at the moment.
Okay, sir. So we'll move forward. Now I request Dr. Meman John, Treasurer of Organizing Committee, ISOT 21 Kochi. Dr. Meman John, sir, is it? Yes.
Amidst the pandemic, which has globally affected 1.6 billion learners across the world, with more than 200 countries being affected, we, the ISOT Kochi team, are extremely grateful to Almighty for bringing together this academic brilliance with participation from neighboring countries as well. At the outset, I would like to thank our distinguished chief guest, Dr. Alvin Roth, on behalf of Team ISOT, for gracing the occasion with the virtual treat we just heard. Nothing beats like having a Nobel laureate on board. Kochi was all set to greet Dr. Marcelo with open arms in spite of the pandemic being the spoiled sport. We are elated to have Dr. Marcelo on our virtual platform. Thank you both for accepting our invite and keeping our spirits soaring. My special thanks to Dr. Jayaprakash, President ISOT, for the tireless effort and putting up the team together. Dr. Sunil Shroff, President-elect ISOT, deserves a special mention for guiding us through this wonderful treat. I would like to place on record my sincere thanks to Dr. Vivek, Secretary ISOT, a word of gratitude to Dr. Narayan Prasad, Treasurer ISOT, for rendering a helping hand. Our past President, Dr. Sandeep Guleria, needs a special mention too. We owe a lot to our beloved delegates. We are thankful to our visual and print media for being with us. The Hyatt Hotel Management here in Kochi were extremely accommodating and helpful. Our sincere thanks. Also, I would like to thank Mr. Moses and team for the excellent audiovisual arrangements here. Nothing would have been possible without the efficient event management team led by Mr. Shekhar. We are grateful for your services. Before I wind up, let me cheer our team, ISOT Kochi, once again for the constant willingness to push each other and pull this event to this summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meman John, for your kind words. I will just recheck whether Dr. Narayan Prasad is here. I think because of some technical issue, he is not here. So with this, we will make every effort to increase access to transplantation with more focus on deceased donation, because 85% transplants in India are from living donor and 15% are from deceased donor. We would also make efforts to overcome the gender disparity in transplantation, because majority of the living donations came from mother and wife because of socio-economic conditions. I believe that the expertise from Professor Alvin Roth will help us to expand multi-center studies, state program, and national program for kidney exchange in India, along with teamwork from all the transplant professionals. I believe that expertise from TTS and Professor Marcelo Cantonvich will help us to expand disease donor program with the help of all TTS champion in parts of country where disease donor is yet not initiated. So with this, we'll come to thank all the delegates, all the speakers, all the chairpersons who have joined this opening ceremony, and we will start the scientific session, that is first opening plenary session by Professor Alvin Roth. Now I hand over mic to President Professor Jay Prakash to start the opening plenary session.
Advol?
Yes, sir.
Now the opening ceremony come to the end. We move on to the Sanskrit program of this opening ceremony. And we are very pleased to have Nobel laureate Dr. Alvin Roth for his plenary talk. Sir, I thank you very much for accepting our invitation and coming to India in Kochi. And I hope we will see you again in India. So over to Dr. Vivek Kute to start the Sanskrit program. Thank you, Dr. Vivek.
Thank you, Professor Jay Prakash, sir. Now we will have the first opening plenary session by Professor Alvin Roth on kidney exchange in world and India. Professor Alvin Roth needs no introduction to those of us in the field of transplantation. His groundbreaking work in area of game theory, experimental economics, and market design as it relates to kidney exchanges has served as a foundation for tens of thousands of living donor kidney transplant around the world. This work was a part of reason he shared 2012 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics with Lloyd Shapley. Professor Alvin Roth has demonstrated a special interest in helping to expand kidney exchange in India, having traveled to both Ahmedabad and Delhi to share his wisdom with us. He is also providing the Alliance for Pair Donation software from Professor Roth and Professor Michael Rees. We are using this user-friendly software in our state to expand the kidney exchange program. And this is especially useful for long chain. I am sure he would be here again today, but for the challenge that COVID has beset upon us. Instead, we are fortunate now to have him join us all the way from California as a chief guest. The chairperson for this opening plenary session is Professor Michael Rees. He is CEO of Alliance for Pair Donation from Toledo. APD has given the gift of life to thousands of patients with kidney exchange. Other chairperson is Professor Vinit Mishra, Director of Kidney Institute, Ahmedabad, which is largest public sector transplant hospital in India and have performed more than 6,000 organ transplantation. He is also chairman of our hospital-based authorization committee. I also welcome Dr. Sunil Shroff, President-elect, for chairing this session, and Dr. Narayan Prasad, ISOT Treasurer and Secretary, Indian Society of Nephrology. I request Dr. Narayan Prasad to say few words before we start recordings of opening plenary session of Professor Alvin Roth. Dr. Narayan Prasad.
Good evening, everybody. Today's chief guest, Dr. Alvin Roth, Nobel laureates, Dr. Marcello, Dr. Michael Rees, President of ISOT, Dr. Jayaprakash Oja, President-elect Dr. Sunil Shroff, past President Dr. Sandeep Guleria, Secretary Dr. Vivek Kute, and our organizing secretary, Dr. Abi Abraham, team members, Dr. Rajesh Nair and Naman John, and the entire organizing team of ISOT 2021. It is always a pleasure to be part of this great society. And I have seen in person and also witnessed, and you all must have witnessed that how the functioning of the ISOT have changed over the time. This was the first time in 2015 when I was the secretary of this ISOT, myself and Dr. Sunil Shroff, along with this, we have organized the meeting first time, the 9 parallel sessions happened across, and since then it is continued functioning. And we all have witnessed there is a lot of progress in the conference functioning, the academic activities of the society that happened. After that, Dr. Vivek Kute and Manish Rathi has took over the charge and took this society to the greater height. And the recent past, you might have witnessed the dynamic leadership of Dr. Vivek Kute, particularly in the form of the many publications, multinational publications, multi-centric publications, and that brought this ISOT on the international arena at the height that we are never expecting that height. Along with this, you must have all witnessed that in real sense, Dr. Vivek Kute truly made this Indian Society of Organ Transplantation and the functioning of this conference are international event. On the today's platform, we can see we have the Nobel laureate Alvin Roth, Michael Rees, Dr. Marcello, the president of the TTS here on the same platform. I feel personally we lag behind in field of the research despite large database and patient pool across India. And there is a need to strengthen the international and national collaboration within the centers, within the institutes, so that more and more data can be collected, more and more publications should come from Indian side. And I think Dr. Vivek Kute has taken the lead in this front. And I think we will see in the future that ISOT took a greater height and took place, the appropriate place on the international platform. We believe that working together and with collaborations with each other within the institution, nationally or internationally, we will achieve this ambition. So wishing you all the best organizing team, Dr. Abi Abraham, Rajesh Nair, Maman John, and the entire team for the next 2 to 3 days of this great conference. And it is really challenging for the organizing team to do all these needful things which are required for this hybrid conference. Thank you everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Vivek, and the entire team.
Thank you, Dr. Narayan Prasad. Professor Michael Rees has just joined. Sir is CEO of Alliance for Prayer Donation, and his work has given the gift of life with kidney exchange to thousands of patients with end-stage kidney disease. Sir has also provided us software which is very user-friendly without any cost. We are using this in our center. I request Professor Michael Rees to introduce Professor Alvin Roth before we start the recordings of Professor Alvin Roth.
Well, thank you very much, Vivek. It's great to be with you here. I wish we could all be together, but that's unfortunately not possible in these difficult COVID times. Let's hope that next year we can be together in person again. It's my great pleasure now to introduce Professor Alvin Roth. Professor Roth needs no introduction to those of us in the field of transplantation. His groundbreaking work in the areas of game theory, experimental economics, and market design as it relates to kidney exchange has served as the foundation for tens of thousands of living donor kidney transplants around the world. This work was part of the reason he shared the 2012 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics with Lloyd Shapley. Al has demonstrated a special interest in helping to expand kidney exchange in India, having traveled to both Delhi and Ahmedabad to share his wisdom with us. I'm sure he would be here again today, but for the challenge that COVID has beset upon us. Instead, we are fortunate now to have him join us all the way from Palo Alto, California, as our chief guest. Al?
Thank you, sir. Now I request organizing team to start the recordings of Professor Alvin Roth opening plenary session on kidney exchange in the world and India.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. And I'd like to talk to you about developments that are happening in India and around the world in kidney exchange. But let me begin by thinking a little bit about transplantation in general of kidneys around the world. And here's a map where the countries that do a lot of kidney transplants per million population are colored in red. And you see that they're mostly wealthy nations in North America and Western Europe, and that most kidney transplants are from deceased donors. Only a minority are from living donors around the world. And this map is actually from 2018, and about 100,000 kidney transplants were performed worldwide. But of course, kidney failure isn't just a problem in rich countries where there's lots of transplantation. It's a problem around the world. It's a global problem. Kidney disease is one of the leading causes of death everywhere. And here's an article from 2015 in The Lancet that estimates that as many as 7 million people might die every year from kidney failure, partly because of financial obstacles to getting dialysis or kidney transplant. And the authors urge us to try to remove these barriers because transplants are the most cost-effective form of renal replacement therapy. So here's an article from Dr. Kute and some of his colleagues about organ donation in India. And one of the points of the article is there isn't much deceased organ donation in India. What happens is mostly in the South, but in India, unlike the rest of the world, unlike the world at large, most kidney transplantation is from living donors. And they note that within India, financial barriers are more prevalent than incompatibility, blood type or tissue type incompatibility, that part of the issue about lifting barriers is going to have to do with the logistics and the bureaucracy and the finances of getting kidneys to people who need them. So here's a graph for 2020 of kidneys transplanted per million population in different countries around the world. Blue is deceased donation and orange is living donation. And actually, unusually this year, this is the first year in which I've made this graph in which the US has led the world. Mostly it's in Spain. It's possible that 2020 is unusual because of COVID. And I'm not sure this is a permanent change. But what you see is in the US, we have more deceased donation than we have living donation, but we have a good deal of it. And in the wealthy countries of the world, there's quite a bit of both deceased and living donation in different amounts. And in India, you're mostly doing living donation. So my talk today is going to focus on live kidney donation and how access to kidney donation has been improved around the world and including in India and can further be improved. So let me tell you the story, let me remind you of the story of how living donation came to exist for kidneys. The first successful organ transplant of any kind was a living kidney donation in 1954 by Dr. Joseph Murray between identical twins. And it was a successful transplant. The recipient lived for a number of years and the donor lived to a ripe old age. And by 1990, the World Health Organization acknowledged that adult living persons may donate organs, but it thought that in general, such donors should be genetically related to the recipients. And that had to do with two concerns. One was just immunosuppression and the state that it was in 1990. And the other had to do with ethical concerns about who should be entitled to give up a kidney for someone who needed one. And they thought that close relatives, that made a lot of sense. By 2000, here's an article that talked about the evolution of attitudes towards kidney donation by friends and altruistic strangers. And it says that many transplant centers break with tradition and accept spousal donors. So of course, spouses they love the patient. They're intimately involved in the life of the patient. They're married, but they're not genetically related. But by 2000, we were seeing more and more spousal donors around the world. And here's an article in 2001, so just 20 years ago, that talks about controversies in organ donation about altruistic living donors and says, recently, many transplant centers have started using living unrelated donors, but the widespread acceptance of such unconventional donors has not occurred because of the difficult ethical issues. The ethical issues concerned both whether it's reasonable for unrelated people to give up kidneys for someone who's not a relative, and also concern about commercial transplantation that we're worried about. Maybe these unrelated donors are being paid. It says an even more difficult ethical dilemma arises if the donor happens to be a stranger, and thus far the use of altruistic strangers has been considered to be an impenetrable taboo. So that was in 2001. And as you're going to see, that taboo has been largely overcome in the United States. And in fact, when I talk to you about kidney exchange, much of the kidney exchange that I'm going to talk about in the United States is accomplished with non-directed donor chains that begin with an anonymous donation by someone who wants to give a kidney and doesn't have a particular recipient in mind. So let's talk about kidney exchange. Often people are healthy enough to give a kidney to someone, but they're incompatible with the patient to whom they want to give a kidney. So here's a very simple example in which donor one loves recipient one and would like to give her a kidney, but they are blood type incompatible. And donor two loves recipient two and would like to give him a kidney, and they're blood type incompatible. And before kidney exchange, these donors would be sent home. They'd be in the United States before we did desensitization on blood type. They'd be told, I'm sorry, your kidney is incompatible with your recipient. You can't give a kidney. They'd go home and the recipients would remain on the deceased donor waiting list, which of course is a long, dangerous wait full of dialysis and deaths while waiting. But as you can see in the picture, we've got a blood type A kidney, which we need, and we've got a blood type B kidney if we need. So a simple kidney exchange has each recipient getting a compatible kidney from the other patient's donor. Okay, so those exchanges are simple, but they're logistically complex because we do them simultaneously. So here's a picture taken in Cincinnati in 2006 of one half of a kidney exchange. The man in the red hat is Steve Woodall, and here's the kidney, and here it's going into the transplant. I'm the visitor keeping my hands out of the way, and this exchange was done simultaneously with one in Toledo, Ohio, where Mike Reese, Dr. Reese, was waiting to do the same thing with the other patient and the other donor. And when I say they were done simultaneously, what I mean is that Dr. Woodall got on his cell phone from the operating room and he called Dr. Reese and he said, "We're ready here. We've anesthetized the patient successfully and we've made the initial incisions. Are you ready in Toledo?" And when Mike said that he was ready, they went ahead and did the exchange. So that's a way to do the exchange that makes sure that both sides go through at the same time, because the same laws that prevent us from buying and selling kidneys prevent us from writing legal contracts that say, "We'll give you a kidney today if you give us one tomorrow." But while that's a successful way of doing these two-way exchanges, it's logistically a little difficult because you need 4 operating rooms to be available simultaneously for 2 nephrectomies and 2 transplants, 4 operating rooms and 4 surgical teams. So if we were going to scale up to a countrywide process as we now have in the United States, we understood that we were going to have to find other ways of delivering transplants. And one of them had to do with these altruistic non-directed donors who I mentioned to you. When we started to accept non-directed donation in the United States, what we used to do is we would look at the non-directed donor very hard, and non-directed donors would go through not just ordinary medical exams to make sure they were healthy enough to give a kidney, but through psychological exams to make sure that they were motivated properly and weren't depressed and things like that. And if they passed through all those screens, they would be invited to give a kidney to someone on the wait list and save their life and take them off dialysis. But now that we had kidney exchange, it became possible to make a more attractive offer to non-directed donors. We could say, you could give to a patient waiting for a kidney exchange, maybe a hard to match patient, whose donor would pass it forward to another pair waiting for kidney exchange, and the donor in that pair would give to someone on the wait list. So it would go to the wait list eventually, which helped to solve some controversy about whether redirecting the non-directed donors was unfair to people on the wait list. It would go to someone on the wait list, and it would be a living donor that went to someone on the wait list. And we'd get, in this picture, 3 transplants. And a picture like that, when the exchange was completed, looked something like this. Here's a chain that was, the exchange was conducted in 2006. And this is a story from the Boston Globe that happened to come out in 2007. And you can see there are 6 people in the picture. And the reason there are 6 people in the picture and not more is that at the time we were doing these chains simultaneously also. And so 6 people involved 3 nephrectomies and 3 transplants, and we could organize 6 simultaneous operating rooms and surgical teams in New England, where this was done, and where we had 14 transplant centers. So organizing 3 simultaneous transplants and 3 nephrectomies took a lot of operating rooms, but we had them, but that was about as big a set of operating rooms as we could easily put together. And so there's the question of why does it have to be simultaneous? Why do we have only 6 people here? So let's think again about why we do conventional cycles, the simplest exchange, simultaneously. And we pretty much always do these simultaneously, although, as I'll tell you, Dr. Kute in India has started to innovate on this margin as well, but that'll come a bit later. so here's a picture. Supposing we didn't do this exchange simultaneously, so that on day one, donor one gives to recipient two. I'm sorry, on day one, donor two gives to recipient one, so no longer has a kidney. And on day two, for whatever reason, donor one fails to give to recipient two. That's this broken line here. Well, that's a really bad outcome because pair two has been harmed. They had a transplant that didn't help them, and they no longer have a kidney to participate in kidney exchange. When we run the next kidney exchange, they won't be able to participate. So to prevent that happening, we always do these simple cycles in the US. We always do them simultaneously so that no pair ever gives a kidney and then fails to get one. Now, when we have a non-directed donor, that changes the story because we can now organize a chain in which every pair gets a kidney before they give one. So here's the non-directed donor who on day one gives to recipient one. And on day two, for whatever reason, the same reason as in the previous picture, donor one fails to give to recipient two. Well, that's very disappointing, but it's not tragic because pair two is no worse off than they are before the non-directed donor appeared. And in particular, they still have a kidney. The next time we do a kidney exchange, they're going to be able to take part in it. So the cost of a broken link is much less. And therefore, we can contemplate at least doing non-simultaneous exchange. And since these non-directed extended altruistic donor chains can be non-simultaneous, they can potentially be long because we'll be able to string together operating rooms when we have them rather than all at the same time. And there was some controversy about this too, about what would happen if the chain breaks, which turns out not to be very common. But as a result, although we first talked about this in 2006, the first non-simultaneous chain wasn't reported until this 2009 article in the New England Journal of Medicine, in which Mike Reese is the first author, and he has some economists and computer scientists co-authors here, and he reported a non-simultaneous chain, which started in July of 2007, and at the time the article was published, had continued until March 2008. And this is the picture that appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine, and this is the picture that appeared in People magazine, in which the patients and donors allowed themselves to be identified. And you can see that the last donor on the chain is blood type AB. And we hadn't fully understood at the time, I think, that ending a chain with a blood type AB donor would make it hard to find a match in the kidney exchange pool because the AB donors who are in the pool tend to be highly sensitized. They obviously don't have blood type incompatibilities with their donors. But my understanding is that it took another 3 years to find an appropriate match for Helena McKinney, but that she was ready when the time came and added another dozen people to this picture. So the point about kidney exchange chains is one non-directed donor can spark a chain that might include some very highly sensitized people. Here's someone with 100% PRA, and allow a lot of transplants to take place. And we've had some chains that are even longer than that. In 2012, this was the longest chain that had so far been conducted. It has 60 people in the picture, 30 transplants and 30 nephrectomies. There have been longer chains since. Most chains are much shorter. I think an average chain that in Mike's organization, the Alliance for Paired Kidney Donation, might have 5 transplants in it. But what that means is that non-directed donors are really valuable. So let's think why long chains are needed. And one of the things I'm getting up to is right now, mostly non-directed donation is not allowed in India, but some innovations in India have allowed some of the same benefits to take place. But let's think why long chains are needed. So this is a picture, if you like, of a typical data set, a tiny piece of a typical data set that's involved in choosing and identifying a chain of kidney exchange transplants. And this particular graph, every circle represents a patient-donor pair, and an arrow goes from one pair to another if the kidney in the first pair is compatible with the patient in the second pair. And in this particular graph, which comes from a moment in the Alliance for Paired Donations database, everyone in the picture, all the patients and all the donors, are blood type A. So none of the incompatibilities are blood type donation. Rather, all of the incompatibilities have to do with people who are highly sensitized. And what you see is in this big group, there's only, well, of 38 pairs, only 8 of them are not highly sensitized. And they're compatible with lots of kidneys. There's lots of incoming arrows to the blue node. So if we just wanted to take care of the easy to match pairs, we could match them two-way with each other. But there are all these other pairs that are highly sensitized and are not going to be part of any two-way matches. And but you can see how a chain could form in a big room full of highly sensitized patients and their donors. So what does it mean that we have a big room full of highly sensitized patients and their donors? It means it's very rare that one of the donors can find someone who he's compatible with, but in a big enough room, there'll be someone he's compatible with. And it's, of course, extremely rare that that pair can return the favor and be part of a two-way exchange. But in a big room, it's not so rare that there's someone else who can get the kidney from the donor of the compatible patient with the non-directed donor. And in a big room, it's not so rare that you can keep moving the chain forward. So when there's an absence of short cycles, there can still be long chains that are waiting for a non-directed donor to initiate them. And indeed, when we look at the distribution of percent reactive antibodies, of sensitivity of patients in some of the big kidney exchanges in the United States, like the Alliance for Paired Kidney Donation and the National Kidney Registry, what we see is it's sort of bimodal. There are some easy to match pairs that aren't very sensitized, and there's some very hard to match pairs who have between 95 and 100 PRA. That is, finding a kidney for them is going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. And when we look at these very highly sensitized patients, we find they skew toward the extremely highly sensitized. That is, there are some patients that are so highly sensitized that even in a big country like the United States, it's very hard to find a kidney for them. That's one reason why a global problem like kidney disease needs a global solution. You need to be able to look at lots of potential donors before you can find one for such a highly sensitized patient. And as a result of this, a lot of the transplants, more than half the transplants done in kidney exchange in the United States are initiated through non-directed donor chains. Okay, because with non-directed donor chains, you can match easy to match pairs with hard to match pairs and reach many more patients, remove some of the barriers to kidney transplantation. So here's a picture through 2019 of kidney pair donation and non-directed donation transplants in the US. 2020 is a little bit changed by COVID. So I don't know that we have all those figures yet. I think they're slightly reduced, but only about 5%. But what you see is we're doing a reasonable number of kidney exchange, especially when you combine them with the non-directed donors who initiate the chains. But of course, this isn't nearly enough. We have almost 100,000 patients waiting for deceased donors in the United States, and we only do about 17,000 deceased donor transplants a year. So again, even in a big country like the United States, where we have active kidney exchange, which has become a standard form of transplantation, we don't have big enough pools to transplant all the people who need to be transplanted in timely ways. Now, kidney exchange has been growing in Europe too. These aren't annual figures; these are cumulative figures. So the Netherlands and the UK have some kidney exchange, not yet on the scale that the US has, and it's growing slowly elsewhere. And one reason it's taking a little while to pick up is a lot of the European kidney exchanges have rules either about limiting the length of exchange or the length of chains, length of cycles or the length of chains. So you can see that the longest exchanges conducted in Europe are in the Czech Republic, which doesn't have any limit on the length of cycles and doesn't have any limit on the length of chains, but that many countries limit the length of a chain or the length of a cycle. And just as in the US, we have highly sensitized patients. They have highly sensitized patients, and those are harder to reach if you don't allow long chains or long cycles. So let me turn now to kidney exchange in India. And again, this is a paper by Dr. Kute and his colleagues. And they make a couple of points that I would like to try to enlarge on in the remaining part of my talk. First, they say paired kidney exchange is organizationally complex. You have to get together all these pairs, but it should be preferred over desensitization because there are both improved outcomes and cost savings. So I want to talk a little more about both of those. And they also point out that the Transplantation and Human Organs Act doesn't permit donor-initiated chains or extended family members and friends, only near relatives, so spouses, parents, siblings, children, grandchildren, and grandparents are permitted as donors in kidney exchange. So I want to talk a little more about that too. That's more restrictive than the Indian law allows for transplants in general. You can receive a kidney transplant from your uncle, but your uncle can't be your intended donor in a patient-donor pair in kidney exchange. So I think that's something that deserves some attention. And then the paper points out that 50% of the donor-recipient pairs in Gujarat are from out of state. And that's important in the sense of financial logistics, because my understanding is that in India, a lot of the finances for transplant are organized at the state level. So patients who come from outside of Gujarat are more complicated to arrange payments than for Dr. Kute and his colleagues in Gujarat. Okay, so incidentally, here's a snippet from the Human Organs and Tissues Act. And what it says is the authorization committee that says it's a legitimate donor and recipient, they are able to authorize transplants in which the donor and recipient are not near relatives. Okay, so they can look at the pair and explain that no payment has been made and explain the link between them. But for kidney exchange, for kidney paired donation, swap donation here, only near relatives can participate. So right now the law in India says that to participate in kidney exchange, it's more restrictive than just to give someone directly a kidney. So if your uncle wants to give you a kidney but is incompatible, he can't participate in kidney exchange. And I'm a little bit mystified by this, for instance, because uncles are as closely related genetically as grandparents are, but apparently they're more suspicious from a commercial transplantation aspect. So let's think a bit about the logistics, the bureaucracy, and the finances associated with kidney exchange in general and in India in particular. So here's this statement that says, kidney exchange is logistically and bureaucratically complex, but medically simple, in contrast to desensitization, which is bureaucratically simple, but medically complex and expensive. So if you're a transplant center, if you're a private hospital somewhere in India, and you have a patient donor pair who are incompatible, you can offer them desensitization, which is bureaucratically simple in the sense that you just are dealing with that patient donor pair, and it's expensive, which is not necessarily a bad thing for the hospital, so it's simple. Payment is simple, and unlike in kidney exchange. But kidney exchange is medically simple because you're transplanting a compatible kidney. Okay. How do we deal with the logistics and bureaucracy? Well, in the US, I really can't overemphasize, every transplant center that's going to do kidney exchange needs someone devoted to helping with the logistics and dealing with the bureaucracy, helping the patients and the donors through all that. And that's done by nurse coordinators, by transplant coordinators who are mostly nurses. And when we talk to hospitals in the US about initiating kidney exchange, about starting a kidney exchange program, often that's the additional person they have to hire. They obviously, transplant centers can already do transplants, but dealing with the bureaucracy and the logistics, which impinge a lot on the patients, right? The patients have to be part of overcoming all these barriers, and having an experienced nurse who acts as the transplant coordinator is a big part of the success of American kidney exchange, and I imagine that will be true in India as well. And then there can be financial barriers in the form of different coverage and reimbursement rates, for instance, for patients from other states in India. And these needn't be an insurmountable barrier, because transplantation is so much cheaper than dialysis that there are lots of savings all around. So in particular, Mike Reese was, the first author on a paper about kidney exchange to overcome financial barriers to kidney transplants. And the main idea of the paper is that in many places in the US and around the world, the cost of a transplant is roughly the same as the cost of a year of dialysis. But after a year of dialysis, you need another year of dialysis. And after transplant, you just need immunosuppression, which is much cheaper. So whenever the state of Gujarat, say, does a transplant on a Gujarati patient, they're going to save a lot of money from their health system. And if a neighboring state's payments aren't quite as much as the payments for Gujarati payments, the savings can help smooth that over. So I'm going to tell you a little more about transplants across borders, but by and large, the idea here is that if a Danish patient is going to be transplanted in the US, it turns out the Danish health insurance has trouble paying for US transplants, but the extra costs can often be covered by the extra savings when highly sensitized patients who would expect long times on dialysis are transplanted, lots of months of dialysis are saved. So the fact that transplantation creates savings should help smooth these financial barriers. They shouldn't be an obstacle. They needn't be an obstacle. And so in particular, all sorts of obstacles can be overcome. Here's a story about a kidney exchange between an Indian pair living in Abu Dhabi and a pair living in Kerala. And I don't read Malayalam, but here's the headline. And this is something that was actually the Abu Dhabi transplant nephrologist is an Indian citizen, Sid Anwar, and the patient donor pair exchanged with a pair in Kerala, exchanged using the software that Mike's organization provides for finding cross-border transplants as well as transplants. And it was done, both transplants were done in India. And here are the surgeons and nephrologists. And two things I'd like to mention about that is first, in general, well, let me start with the second. My understanding is that the Indian pair was offered desensitization in Kerala, and that it would have cost 35 lakh rupees, but that a transplant of compatible kidneys also only cost a fifth as much, 7 lakhs, so that it's cheaper to do a compatible kidney transplant than a one that involves a lot of desensitization. It also involves less opportunistic infection afterward. It involves better mortality statistics, because in developing countries like India in particular, transplanting incompatible, tissue type incompatible patients involves a lot of immunosuppression, and then the patients are subject to getting infections when they go home. And so transplanting compatible kidneys uses less immunosuppression and produces less infection and better survival than desensitization. So there are lots of reasons to think that even though it's bureaucratically simple, it's not as desirable a medical treatment. Desensitization is not as desirable a medical treatment as transplanting a compatible kidney through kidney exchange. Okay, so let me tell you, though, about what I think is a very exciting development in kidney exchange in India. And again, this is a paper of Dr. Kute and his colleagues. And in Gujarat, they don't have access, they can't use non-directed donors, so they can't do non-directed donor chains. And so it's been hard for them to get some of the highly sensitized patients transplanted. And instead, they've been pioneering non-simultaneous cycles. So cycles that aren't simultaneous. And so you have to think a lot about the same things I told you about earlier when I talked about why we do pairs simultaneously in the United States, which is if a cycle breaks, there's a pair that will have given a kidney before they got one, and they're going to be potentially harmed quite a bit. So what they say here in this article is they say, the non-directed donors who would be needed to initiate change are unavailable. And it's also hard to organize simultaneous cycles. And so they decided to try non-simultaneous cyclic exchanges. So let me show you one and then go back to talk about it a little bit. So here's an exchange that had 10 pairs in it with 3 bridge donors. So the bridge donors, the bridge pairs are they're colored dark. And what you see is each of these, they donated, this one donated on 4th January and only got the kidney back on January 22nd. Okay, so these people were waiting a long time to get a kidney after donating one. These people donated on the 7th and got a kidney back the next day on the 8th. And this pair donated on the 6th and got a kidney back the next day. The others were all got a kidney at the same time as they donated. So what's going on here? And in particular, what you can see is there are 10 pairs, so 10 transplants, 10 nephrectomies. The whole thing, this is a completed cycle. They all got their kidneys as planned. But here's a pair that was willing to take quite a bit of risk in a certain sense. That is, something could go wrong in the many days between January 4th and January 22nd. So how to think about them? Well, so they did quite a few of these. They report 17 successful non-simultaneous kidney exchange cycles with 67 transplants. And one of the things they did is they were ready to use deceased donor kidneys in case there was a breach, in case one of these pairs that gave a kidney before they got it needed one. They were going to put them to the front of the deceased donor list. And to do that, of course, the pairs that are nominated to take the risk, the pairs that are nominated to be bridged, have to be pretty unsensitized, right? So that they'll be able to accept a deceased donor kidney. And there were some other innovations as well. The first, of course, is that this is a cycle and it's non-simultaneous. The second, it's non-anonymous. Apparently, one of the protocols they used in order to give everyone confidence that this would go through is they had everyone meet everyone else. And so they were able to form a community in the way that kidney exchange allows people to mutually assist each other. They formed a sort of mutual assistance community. They all agreed that they would do this, and they all did it in quite a number of non-simultaneous kidney exchange cycles. So I think it would be easier if you allowed non-directed donors. And if I were recommending changes in the Indian transplant law, I certainly recommend that be among them. But here in Gujarat, at least, they've invented a way to get around that problem and provide transplants where they wouldn't otherwise be available. So let me close by telling you about some other logistically difficult or bureaucratically and diplomatically difficult transplants. There's this past summer, I got to spend a little time in Abu Dhabi in connection with the first ever transplant between Israel and an Arab nation, a kidney exchange transplant. And there's my Greece. Here's the 2 kidneys being literally exchanged in the Abu Dhabi airport. Tamar Ashkenazi, the director of the Israeli Transplant Authority, flew in with an Israeli kidney and flew back out with a UAE kidney. There's tracking software that allowed Mike Reese and his colleagues to watch it happen. There's a box on top there. That's my understanding is that's the thing that's doing the tracking. That's the GPS device that explains where the kidney is at any moment. And what happened is 3 mothers got kidneys that they couldn't have gotten within the relatively small kidney exchange pools in Israel and the UAE. That is, both Israel and the UAE have populations of about 10 million. And that's just not big enough to take care of highly sensitized patients. And the recipients in all 3 pairs, that there was a Jewish pair in Israel, there was an Israeli Arab pair, and there was a pair in Abu Dhabi that just wishes to be identified as residents of Abu Dhabi. And in each case, the person getting the transplant was a mother who had been sensitized, and in particular was sensitized against the paternal HLAs, so couldn't receive a kidney from her husband or one of her daughters. But in a 3-way exchange, they were all able to get kidneys. So that involved, medically simple. The kidneys are compatible, but the diplomacy was complex, and it's been a while since that happened now, and partly it's because everyone hadn't yet signed off on exactly what would be said publicly about this, but now there's been sign off, and so kidney exchange doesn't just improve health; it can also improve peace. It's a powerful tool for people who need kidneys and the people who love them to help each other. Okay, so thinking about the future a little bit, I was fortunate to be able to visit Ahmedabad in 2019 before coronavirus shut down travel, and I got to witness a kidney transplant using a Da Vinci robot. So the thing about a Da Vinci robot is the surgeon hasn't scrubbed in. He's not touching the patient. And in fact, the patient isn't far away in this case, but could be, right? The surgeon is getting a 3-dimensional magnified view of what he's doing. And the patient wouldn't necessarily have to be in the same hospital, right? The patient is attended by people, is surrounded by surgeons who are taking the devices in and out, but the surgeon could be elsewhere. So that starts to suggest that it might be possible to cross other barriers that haven't yet been able to cross in terms of making surgery available, even where the full surgical team might not be present. They might be somewhere communicating over a very reliable internet. There are other things that you could think about that would help remove barriers. Here's a paper by Mike Reese and me and some of our surgical colleagues and nephrologists that in the US proposed utilizing deceased donor kidneys to initiate living donor chains. So in India, where you don't have, we don't allow yet non-directed living donors, deceased donors are mostly non-directed. So one thing that you might think of allowing is to begin a chain with an appropriate high quality deceased donor that would start a non-directed donor chain that would end up giving to someone waiting for a deceased donor kidney, but in the meantime would allow people waiting for kidney exchange to get kidneys. And there's actually at least one that I know of that's taken place that's been reported in the literature in Italy, following this proposal. So that's another thing to think about, is how to leverage the deceased donors you do have to start chains. And instead of getting one transplant for each deceased donor kidney, you might be able to get many transplants for deceased donor kidneys. And in general, thinking about non-directed donors, if you are going to allow non-directed donors, you have to plan to take very good care of them. And in the US, we've slowly been learning how to do that. And this is from the Alliance for Paired Kidney Donations page, but and it talks about what are the things we can legally do for a non-directed donor, and we can you can't pay for a kidney, but you can reimburse lost wage and travel expenses, and you can give some insurance, and you can say to them that they are at the top of the list for getting a kidney if they ever need one themselves, or perhaps you can make some promise of that sort to members of their family as well. So these are all things to think about as you think about how the organ donation laws in India might be modernized to take it, to be able to utilize the modern practices of kidney exchange. And let me end just by saying that just a little while ago, a number of medical organizations, including the Transplantation Society, signed on and published a reaffirmation of organ donation that I'd like to read to you. Dr. Kantarovich is currently the president of TTS. And what they said is, they said, we want to reaffirm essential values held by the worldwide community of transplant providers about access. They said, donation implies generosity and solidarity and should take place daily, routinely, and peacefully around the globe, regardless of age, gender, race, education, or income of donors, right? So they're talking about how we should remove some of the barriers that prevent people, particularly in the developing world, from getting kidneys. And international medical societies representing transplantation professionals across the globe stand against any form of barriers around the gift of life, particularly related to gender, race, religion, and income. We embrace a call of action to support equitable access to transplantation for all patients with end-stage organ disease. And I think that's a great goal, nicely stated in this TTS reaffirmation, and that it's something that Indian transplant professionals can think about as you talk to Indian policymakers about revisions in the law that you might want to make to remove the remaining barriers, remove the existing barriers, the many existing barriers to kidney transplantation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Alvin Roth, for this comprehensive opening plenary session. I request Dr. Michael Rees for his brief comment.
Thank you, Vivek. We are very fortunate to hear from Professor Roth about all the innovations that have taken place. Kidney exchange has really expanded and now provides more than 20% of all the living donor kidney transplants in the United States. And so I would like to encourage the Indian Society of Transplantation to seriously consider how they might expand that, given that living kidney transplantation is the primary form of kidney transplantation in India. And there's evidence now that the number of patients helped could be increased by 20%. And as Professor Roth told us, the success rate with a compatible transplant and the cost with a compatible transplant, which can be achieved through paired exchange, the success is better and the cost is less. So there are many reasons to try to figure out how to do this. I would it be okay if I asked some questions? Vivek?
Yes, sir.
So, Al, as you have engaged in India and watched the progress of paired exchange, obviously Dr. Kute has been able to really expand kidney exchange at his program at the Trivedi Transplant Institute. But in other places in India, we've seen slower growth. What do you see as some of the barriers that could be overcome in India? And as you approach this as an expert in market design, perhaps you could start with those that you see as being the lowest hanging fruit and the easiest barriers to overcome, given the innovation that's taken place over the last 20 years in other places in the world.
Well, I'm hardly expert enough on the situation in India to offer any kind of authoritative advice. But one of the things I already mentioned was it would be good to make it easier for non-directed donors. I recall that some years ago, you and I met a Catholic priest in Kerala who was organizing donors. And so I don't doubt that there are people who would be non-directed donors in India. That would help. It would help to make donation easier for the donors, for the related donors. We spoke about that. In the US, I'm on the board of the advisory board of an organization called NALDAC, the National Living Donor Assistance Center. And it's federally funded to help donors overcome some of the financial barriers that they face. And I know your organization has arranged to be able to help donors that you deal with. So I think that would help too, to overcome these financial barriers. Again, the cost savings of transplantation are big enough that it ought to be possible to bring together the resources to remove some of the difficulties that families face in donation and transplantation, and that hospitals face. So I would think easing, making it bureaucratically easier would make for more transplantation.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Vineet Mishra, Director, Kidney Institute, for his comment. Dr. Vineet Mishra, sir.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It is always pleasure to see Professor Resch, Professor Roth, and of all our Pitama, the big man, Jay Prakash sir. Sir, namaskar. It is always nice to see you. And with all what Professor Vivek Kutte is doing something which is excellent. I do not know much about what is happening around the world, but what is happening in the institute with the initiative what Vivek has done is excellent. Let me share with you, Professor Michael and Professor Roth, is that we did country's largest chain of 10 people. And Vivek will correct that it is country's first largest 10 patient chain or this thing that we have done. Now what we are contemplating, and I am talking to the government, is that we should be having an intrastate operative procedure where the donors who have been matched and the recipients who have been matched, they are into the chain program, who are into the swap, individual hospitals operating. And then the second step which we will be doing is going across the state. And ultimately things in next 2-3 years would be, with all blessings of Jay Prakash sir, is that we will have a countrywide swap program in which probably initially either the recipient, the donor usually will travel. The recipient remains within the institute. And the ultimate dream which I have is that yes, the donor and the recipient remains in the individual institute and only the organs are sent across. So logistically to the patient, where they are in the familiar environment, Professor Resch and Professor Roth, is that they remain, because in Indian culture, as Jay Prakash sir would agree, being operated and being cared by family and the environment which they are familiar, this gives them a very big moral boost. So those days are not away when the organ would be harvested, especially the kidneys, and they could go back to the institute where the recipient is there, and this sort of organ exchange would take place. So whatever guidance all stalwarts are giving, and we have an enthusiastic person called Vivek Kutte, who is always enthusiastic in doing something which is new to this country. And when I take up his proposal and go to the politician and bureaucrats, they are extremely, Jayaprakash sir, extremely vigilant listening, and they are aghast that such things can happen. But we have proven at the institute and within the state that a swap of 10 people can take place within the institute, and no one has defaulted. No casualties have taken place. And that is what the big boost to the program has happened. So when stalwarts are there in ISOT debating, all my luck is with them and with all stalwarts who are there on the screen. Let me tell you, under the guidance of stalwarts like Jayaprakash sir, big things are happening in this country. We have a very strong political will there, and we have committed people, and we have committed people who are guiding us. Thank you very much for allowing me to share my thoughts within the academic community of transplantation. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you, Professor Misra, for the compliment to me, and I wish things will progress in better way in future.
Ji sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Director Vinit Mishra sir, for kind words, and you are always helping the kidney exchange program in our center, and with your support and initiative, we hope to start the multi-center program first in the state, and hopefully in the coming few years, we will able to start state, regional and national program. Thank you, Director Vinit Mishra sir. Now, I request Dr. Sunil Shroff sir for his comment. Dr. Sunil Shroff. I think there is some technical issue. So with this...
Dr. Sunil Shroff is here.
Yeah. Dr. Sunil Shroff sir. Sir, can you unmute?
Yes, I have unmuted. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm right here in Kochi, so the technical issues are likely to be less. I mean, a great start to the whole program this evening, and wonderful to hear Dr. Alvin Roth. And at the outset, I want to congratulate Michael Rees, my friend, for making this happen. His dream of doing this cross-country, cross-border exchange programs, making it happen, and creating such communal harmony, in the Arab world. Wonderful, Michael, and congratulations to you. I hope more such, endeavors can be undertaken to make this happen. I think kidney exchange is wonderful because it creates such, not only, helps the program, and it gives out such good stories and brings kidney disease in sharp focus. And it's good, but because the regulators notice it, so it's good overall for the program. I think there's a huge opportunity in India to take kidney exchange forward. And I personally feel that it can take care of at least 15 to 20% of our kidney shortage. Every week I get a call and where a kidney exchange is possible. I think the barriers here are that we don't have many centers doing kidney exchanges. It's very difficult in a large hospital, busy hospital, to get 4 operating rooms and staff and trained surgeons together to be able to do this surgery simultaneously. And this is a requirement under the law. Vivek has managed to do this in Ahmedabad. He has done a few innovative things, but he does require special permission. You must remember that 90% of transplants are done in private sector hospitals in India. Vivek has an advantage of being in a public sector hospital. So in a private sector hospital, probably getting the regulatory kind of requirements, getting the permissions is likely to be a little bit more difficult. And if we can do it non-simultaneously, these kidney exchanges, then obviously it will move forward. And health being a state subject, I think every state has to take a call on this, how to make this happen. Definitely, this is very much possible. We need to have better processes in place. We need to have better registries where the pool of, the pool is, better. And, at the end of the day, if you have a large pool and if you use a little bit of machine learning and AI, you can really get very good kidney matched to the recipients. And this is great for the program and great outcome for kidney transplant as well. I think it's going to take a little bit of time in our country. We are slowly evolving. I know there are centers in Mumbai doing it, Gujarat doing it, and Kerala has done it in the past. I do remember reading stories way back in 2015-16 where you did have good exchange programs going on in Kerala as well. So I think, we need to work together, and as a society, perhaps we should put some processes in place. We should put some guidelines in place, take it to the government of India, push it so that, we can do this at, lesser cost compared to the ABO-incompatible transplants, which are a little bit more expensive, definitely, with slightly more higher risks. So kidney exchange is the way to go. And thank you very much for this great start to the ISOT meeting. Thank you, and good evening to all of you.
Dr. Sunil Shroff has done comprehensive work in deceased donor organ transplant, and we all fondly call him father of cadaver transplant. Sir, what is your opinion when we can start deceased donor initiated kidney exchange chain in India?
It's just waiting to happen. It should have actually, you have probably done it in Gujarat. I don't think there should be much of a challenge there. Then here again, the regulatory bodies really need to take a call on this, the NOTO and the SOTOs, to be able to do this. You need to make an exemption, and make sure that, you start with a good kidney, the exchange program. I think, it's very much there, and I think it can be brought into the regulatory, the regulation as well, where there should be an option for the, the state convener to be able to offer a kidney to an exchange program. I think, we just need to sit together, and we need to, do some brainstorming to make these things happen. And there's a lot of requirement of working together, and with creating a lot of trust between each other to make this happen. And I think, if large institutions collaborate together, it'll be much easier than one institute trying to do a kidney exchange within themselves. If two large hospitals in a city decide to do it, it's just a question of, getting this logistics the logistics will be a lot easier. So I think, initially I think even before the disease donation comes in and contributes to the pool, I think collaborating between large hospitals for kidney exchange in a city should start happening. And that can only happen if the regulatory bodies call all the hospitals together and create pairs of institutions, just like, kidney exchange is pair exchange. Same way you create pairs of institutions, hospitals, coming together to do these kidney exchanges, and then encourage them to do it. And again, we need to also look at the law as well, because we'll really require to tweak our law a little bit to incorporate, where, it can be non-directed as well. And, if they can even incorporate cadaver disease donor kidneys to be put into the pool, I think it will really help. So that's what I think, it's just a matter of a little bit more time, a little bit more trust building into the program, and I think this will happen. Thank you.
Is there any other remark or comment from other panel? May I request Professor Alvin Roth for take-home message from his side to all of us? Brief take-home message, sir.
I'm sorry, I had trouble hearing. What would you like me to do?
Any take-home message from you, sir, for India?
Well, I'm very encouraged by what I've heard. India is a pioneer in bringing transplantation to people who need it in the developing world, and I hope that it will continue to make great progress in India and be a model for the rest of the world, because kidney disease doesn't respect borders. It happens to human beings all over the world, and the kidneys are all pretty much the same. We should learn to cooperate between hospitals, between states, between countries, to help alleviate the worst aspects of the disease. And I'm delighted to see what's going on in India.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Jaiprakash sir for his closing remark and vote of thanks.
My sincere and thanks to Professor Alvin Roth, Michael Rees, and Dr. Marcelo to join us in the opening ceremony of 31st Annual Conference of Indian Society of Organ Transplantation. I thanks each and everyone who have participated in the opening ceremony of the meeting and their contribution to make the opening ceremony a great success. Finally, I thank everyone, and I think hand over the mic to Professor Kute to final remark and close the function.
Thank you, Professor Alvin Roth. Thank you, Professor Marcelo. Thank you, Dr. Michael Rees, Dr. Vinit Mishra, Dr. Sunil Shroff, Dr. Abhi, Dr. Rajesh Nair, Dr. Guleria, Dr. Narayan, entire ISOT team, Kochi, for joining the opening ceremony, and we look forward to your valuable presence tomorrow starting from 10 a.m. Thank you. Over to Dr. Abhi Abram.
Thank you. We have come to the end of the scientific sessions of the first day of ISOT 2021. Let's gather again tomorrow for a power-packed academic session. The scientific sessions will begin tomorrow sharp at 10. Good night for today.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Jai Prakash, sir. Good night. Good night.
Good night,
Professor
everybody.
Ellen Roth
I'll join you tomorrow.
Dr. Mishra,
Okay, thank
Dr.
you.
Prakash,
So,
nice
bye-bye,
to see you.
bye-bye, bye.
Good morning from California.
Good night from India.